Now, you'll have heard in the news that badger culling is back right at the top of the agenda today. And it was billed as a peaceful, family-friendly protest against the government's badger cull policy. Yesterday, around 100 campaigners marched in Bodmin amid reports that new badger culls are set to take place in designated parts of Cornwall and Devon. Well, the majority of the southwest farming community remains in favour of the badger culling. Chris Cardell is chair of the National Farmers Union in Cornwall and says bovine TB on any farm is highly stressful.
Well, it's a total lockdown on the farm normally, until you get clear, and it's a testing every 60 days, so there's stress to the animals, stress to the farmer, time, loss of production. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this that possibly not everybody thinks of.
Culling has been trialled for the last 3 years in Gloucestershire and Somerset, and Mr Cardell says the feedback there has been good.
We're still awaiting the DEFRA figures to come out from the trial areas, but talking to fellow members in those areas, the reaction seems to be very positive at the moment, and the results seem to be very favourable for the birds that are in fact, within those areas.
Reaction fairly positive. Well, maybe not necessarily. Leading yesterday's protest was Dominic Dyer, Chief Executive of the Badger Trust. Good morning, Dominic. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
What do you think the demonstration yesterday may have achieved?
Well, this was the 39th protest we've had in towns and cities across the United Kingdom over the last 3 years. So we've brought thousands of people in towns from Stratford-upon-Avon, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Brighton, up and down the country. And I think what we're seeing is growing public anger, political anger as well. And most leading scientists now believe that the badger cull is highly ineffective, very cruel, and hugely costly. So far, we've spent about £25 million of taxpayers' money just killing under 4,000 badgers, and none of them have been tested for TB. So it's a completely blind cull. We have no idea how many of those animals have the disease. From further scientific research done in different areas in past culling exercises, it's probably likely that 85-90% of the animals are completely TB-free.
Why do you think there is so much opposition on this subject? Because one side says it's ridiculous, we don't need to cull the badgers, and the other side says it's vitally important, we do need to cull the badgers. How can the two sides get to meet and have some decent conversation about what really is happening? Because it must be very confusing just to have people say, no, you're not right.
I think the problem with the badger debate is that the badger's been a scapegoat for failures in our farming industry. Bovine TB is a significant social and economic problem for farmers. I have great sympathy for them having to deal with it. But the mounting evidence we're seeing is that badgers, yes, they can get TB from cattle, but there's very little evidence they can actually pass TB back to cows. There's only one experiment in 1975 where they were effectively locked in a pen and cattle were put alongside these badgers with TB, and it took 6 months for the first calf to become infected. And the scientists involved in that particular survey said that it wasn't fit for purpose. It was a very artificial experiment, but it actually showed even in those conditions it was very, very difficult to spread the disease from the badger to the cow. So I think we've been sort of aiming at the wrong target. We know if we actually improve our testing systems for cattle for TB, if we improve our movement controls and biosecurity on the farm, we can significantly reduce the disease. And we've seen the impact of that in Wales, where we've seen the number of cattle slaughtered over the last 5 years to TB come down by 48%, and the number of new herd incidents come down by 14% in the last 12 months, and they've not been culling badgers. So there are alternative ways to get on top of this without having to kill wildlife.
Now, you've just written, or you've just published your book, Badgered to Death, and is there all this kind of research in there?
Yes, I've gone back and looked at 40 years of what's been done, and what I've found is incompetence, negligence and deceit to a large degree from the governments, from Labour, Conservative, Liberal governments over all that period of time, from the farming lobby, from the veterinary industry, and even the media, in my view, have not covered this issue well enough. So I think what we've done is really gone around in a big circle. We've wasted tens of millions of pounds. We've killed large numbers of badgers. The disease in cattle has not come down. We made some terrible mistakes. In the foot and mouth crisis of 2001, we allowed the restocking of cattle from TB hotspot areas with nearly 2 years for no TB testing at all. So we went from having 5,000 TB reactors in the national herd to over 28,000 by 2003. So this was a huge increase in the disease through mistakes that were made by the farming industry and the government at the time. And that basically spilled TB into our wildlife. And it's not just badgers that have the disease. Rats and deer and cats and other animals have it. And in the case of rats, there's lots of evidence to show they're more likely to be interacting with cattle in the farmyard environment. So we believe that could be a key vector as well.
Now, we did hear Chris Cardell from the NFU say he was getting good feedback from the current trial areas in the wider southwest. So don't you think we need to get the results of those before we declare whether it's a success or failure?
I think the problem is how much money we're spending. As I've said already, we've spent around £25 million so far killing under 4,000 badgers. If we extend into different areas like Devon and Cornwall and other parts of the country, we could soon spend £100 million killing these animals in the next 5 years. That's a massive amount of public money. And I think what we've got to be certain is it's actually working. We're also concerned that the cull is cruel because the British Veterinary Association came out last year and said that the free shooting of badgers, where you're basically shooting these animals when they come out of their sets at night, is cruel. Many of them take 5, 10, 15 minutes to die of blood loss and organ failure because you can't shoot them outright very easily. So we believe that should stop. But the government are continuing to use that killing method because it's far cheaper than actually trapping badgers in cages and killing them, which is what was used in the culling trials that the last Labour government undertook between 1998 and 2007. So, we have serious concerns on humaneness grounds. And also, to be fair, if you look at the DEFRA figures in terms of TB rates, the level of new TB incidents in herds and the number of reactors being slaughtered in Dorset, Gloucestershire and Somerset continues to rise. So we see no evidence that killing these badgers is having any impact at all.
Chris Cardell. No, I beg your pardon. That's not Chris Cardell. That's Dominic Dyer, Chief Executive of the Badger Trust, talking with passion about badger culling.